As an herbalist, I really like the herbal approach because I find that plants are very effective. They have a chemical nature about them, and so they address the chemical nature of our bodies and brains. And they often have fewer side effects.
Have you ever felt like anxiety just sneaks up on you and takes over without warning? You're not alone. For many women, especially during menopause, anxiety can show up in different ways. Sometimes it's in those racing thoughts that keep you up at night. Other times, it's just that unshakable feeling of tension that sits with you throughout the day. The truth is, anxiety looks different for everyone, and it's often a silent struggle that we don't talk about enough. Menopause brings so many changes, and anxiety is one of the hardest to deal with. Many women think maybe it's just me and feel isolated in what they're going through. But I want you to know it's not just you. Anxiety during menopause is incredibly common. It's not just about the physical symptoms, but the emotional and mental impact that often gets ignored. I remember in our old menopause chit chat community, anxiety was one of the single most discussed topics. In that space, women shared their fears, their sleepless nights, and that constant underlying tension. It was clear anxiety wasn't just a passing feeling, it was a significant part of so many of our lives. And if you're feeling that way now, know you're not alone. We're all here facing this together. This episode is part of the Menopause Anxiety Project, a series on the Empart YouTube channel that focuses on understanding and managing anxiety while we're navigating menopause. It's about starting conversations that matter and offering tools to help women feel less alone and more empowered. And today, we're diving deep into how we can manage anxiety in a natural way. We're not talking about quick fixes or instant relief, but about real, practical ways to bring more calm into your life. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce someone who has dedicated her life to natural healing, Holly Bellebuono. Holly is an accomplished herbalist, educator, and author with over 25 years of experience helping people harness the power of plants to improve their well-being. She's the director of the Bellebuono School of Herbal Medicine and has trained countless herbalists in her career. You may remember Holly from a recent episode of Real Insights, where we talked about herbal remedies for menopause symptoms. Today, she'll share practical ways we can use herbs to bring more calm into our lives during menopause, a time when anxiety often feels overwhelming. Let's welcome Holly Bellebuono. Hi, Holly. Welcome back.
Thank you. So good to be here.
It's good to have you. You know, the last time that you were here, we broadly talked about herbs that we could use during menopause and how we could really incorporate them into our everyday lives. And you are so knowledgeable, and I think that the audience really got a lot from that interview. But today, I think I'd like to go just a little bit deeper on a topic that really affects a lot of women, especially during menopause, and that is anxiety. I know that you've recently done a whole course about the brain and how herbs can help us during this time. So, if you wouldn't mind just taking some time to tell us what exactly is going on with our brain and anxiety and the stress we have in our lives, and how we could notice symptoms or recognize what is happening.
Great. Glad to. It's a huge topic. It's a common topic. So many people experience symptoms of anxiety. It's normal. We all do at some period or another. And so, yeah, I've done quite a bit of extensive research recently to update and expand my new course, Herbs for the Brain. I've actually got two courses. One is for the beginner, and one is a certificate for healthcare professionals. And what I discovered is that it's common. We are all subject to anxiety for various reasons at different times. B, despite that, there can be some shame with it, especially for people who think they've got it all together. To feel anxiety, which is a fear response triggered by a variety of different things, can make people feel embarrassed or shy. and not want to talk about it because it's considered a mental health disorder. But it's common. It's everywhere, and we all need to support each other through these periods. And there are many ways to do that. There's counseling, there's groups, there's walking with your friends. As an herbalist, I really like the herbal approach because I find that plants are very effective. They have a chemical nature about them, and so they address the chemical nature of our bodies and brains. And they often have fewer side effects than pharmaceutical medicines. And those side effects could be nausea, upset stomach, poor sleep. They make you feel icky so you can't sleep. Um, Sometimes sexual dysfunction. There's a wide range, headaches. There's a lot of side effects that come with taking pharmaceutical antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. And so to find the herbs that can support you through that process of getting through that anxiety, whether it's short term or long term, can be really wonderful because it can be a strengthening experience instead of a pull down experience. So, in my Herbs for the Brain course, I describe a lot of what the brain is doing, what you find in the actual neurons, what's going on. And one of the big players in the brain they're called neurotransmitters. So most of us have heard of serotonin and dopamine. Those are two of the key neurotransmitters. There's also acetylcholine, there's norepinephrine, there's a lot of them. And what they do is they are little tiny chemical sacs, and they're in the neuron, which is the nerve cell. And you have a gazillion nerve cells in your brain, right? And each nerve cell is connected to another by way of a little gap called the synapse. And the neurotransmitter is triggered to go across that synapse to the next neuron. And what it does is basically a chain reaction. So if you've ever gone to a football game or a soccer game in the stadium and they do the wave, right? That's a chain reaction. A group of people over here starts it, and then the next people go, and then the people after them go. It's the same with neurotransmitters in your brain, from one neuron across the synapse to the next neuron, on and on and on, until it reaches to one of two destinations. One is the final neuron, which is tasked with establishing the emotion, happiness, joy, satiation, fulfillment. Or instead of a neuron, it goes to a muscle cell. And the muscle cell makes your muscle move. So, for instance, when serotonin is stimulated in the brain, it goes along its chain, yay, 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 and then it reaches the final neuron, and you experience joy. You have these feelings, these emotions of contentment. Dopamine does the same thing, but it often stimulates muscles. So, its neurotransmitter path ends in a muscle cell, and you can lift your arm. When we see this fail, the neurotransmitter hasn't done its job, or it's gotten blocked, or it's gotten eaten by an enzyme, or something happened that kept it from going along that chain reaction, and you experience sadness, or depression, or hopelessness, or despair. Or if it's dopamine, for instance, you can develop muscle degeneration and diseases such as Parkinson's. So that's the basic gist of what neurotransmitters do. With anxiety, that can be a cause of anxiety. You also have other options. You've got genetics. Perhaps it runs in your family genetically, and you're just predisposed to feeling anxious. It could be environmental toxins. There are a lot of chemicals in our world, that even things that you don't think about too much, like you paint your house or you buy new office supplies for your desk, and you're smelling or you're inhaling toxins, fumes that can trigger anxiety. It could be social stressors. You know, our society is so full of ways that force us to isolate ourselves or that depress us. So socially, you know, it's a very valid reason you feel anxious. So all of these are ways that we can experience anxiety. And it's also worth noting that the symptoms of anxiety are not just you feel anxious, but there's the emotional response, which is worry or fear. sometimes even irritation. There's a physical response. I mean, your body really, really embodies, to use a terrible word, anxiety. You feel muscle tension, your muscles cramp up, you get nauseous in your stomach, your heartbeat starts to go fast. You can experience shortness of breath. Some people get dizzy. Some people develop tics and muscular compulsions. So you've got the emotional symptoms, you've got physical symptoms in the way that it manifests in your body. And then you've also got cognitive symptoms. So that's how your brain, you feel sluggish or you have difficulty concentrating if you're anxious. You really can't focus the way you should. Or you have intrusive thoughts. You can't really filter out what's going through your mind. Or you experience foggy brain. You just can't, you don't have the cognitive capacity that you thought. So, especially for teenagers, us menopausal women, if we've got children or grandchildren who are experiencing anxiety, you see it in them. You can see it in the way they breathe. You can see it in the way they talk and think because that anxiety is affecting the way that they process and filter and move forward. That's kind of the background of anxiety. That's where it comes from, or many of the options, the possibilities of where it can come from, and then how it manifests and displays when you're experiencing it.
It's so interesting that we can notice it in others, but yet it feels like when we're going through, and there was a whole host of different feelings, mentally, physically, emotionally. I wish we were better able at recognizing those things in ourselves so that we could help ourselves get through those periods of time.
Yeah, a lot of times people dismiss it or they'll say, um, that couldn't be happening to me. Or they say, this will pass, I can just ignore it. Or, a host of other excuses to help you not focus on helping yourself get better and overcoming and um, developing mechanisms and tools, really building a toolkit that will help you identify and then work on it.
I think that's one of the big problems though is it doesn't pass as quickly as we would like. And I think that's when we fall into some pretty bad patterns because we think that it's okay to feel this crappy.
Right. Right. Or some people think they deserve it, which is a really sad response. None of us deserves it. We all deserve to be happy and joyful and clear-headed, clear-minded, creative, ambitious. All of these are effects of neurotransmitters, ambition even. I never knew this, that setting goals and being ambitious and looking ahead, looking forward is actually a response of the dopamine neurotransmitter. And if you don't have enough dopamine, you can feel lost and lethargic and you don't set goals, you don't look ahead, you don't plan, you don't feel like you're an ambitious person, which is a loss. And so upping that dopamine in a variety of ways can really help you feel that recharge again and get that electricity going.
Yeah, sometimes it could be such a vicious circle because you want those things for yourself and you know that there's so much more out there. And that, menopause is just a little phase that we should all be going through. But to, yes, have some tools in our toolkit so that we could say, this isn't right and this isn't how we want to be feeling. So I think then a good way to look at the next chapter would be to talk to experts like yourself who say, okay, I've got a couple of things that you could try. What are some of your favorite or most effective remedies, herbal remedies that you've come across that could really maybe help women during this phase of their lives?
Definitely. I've got a list ready for you that I put together for my course. It's a really solid list of both traditional herbs, mostly Western, but also Ayurvedic herbs, which are from India primarily, and then more modern, or at least herbs that have been studied more modernly and scientifically proven, so to say. Um, so before I go into that list, I'd like to share with you some categories of herbs that if you're experiencing anxiety or you're supporting someone else with anxiety, it could be your child or grandchild, it could be your elder parent who is feeling that anxiety of age and what comes next, and I'm feeling lonely and there are changes happening, and it could be a variety of reasons, but when you're supporting someone with anxiety, you want to think about certain categories of herbs. One of those categories is called anxiolytic, which basically means anti-anxiety. And those are herbs that really have a chemical effect on your brain. They affect those neurotransmitters either directly or indirectly. And there are two types of anxiolytics. There's sedative that can put you to sleep and non-sedative, so non-drowsy. So we'll look at some of each of those. And there are also other categories. There are bitters. Bitter herbs really help digestion. And that's something we don't think a whole lot about when we're experiencing anxiety. Maybe we feel nauseous as a symptom, but poor digestion can actually lead to anxiety. It's that gut-brain connection. It can lead to depression as well. So, bitters is a category of herbs that just taste bitter. Chamomile is an example of a mild bitter. Dandelion leaf is pretty bitter. So those are examples of herbs that they're not affecting the neurotransmitters necessarily, and they're not specific for anxiety, but they can definitely help, especially if there's nausea and indigestion going on. And then other herbs are more tonic herbs, and tonics are super gentle, almost food-like herbs, like lemon balm. Lemon balm is it's called the gladdening herb, and it's one of the first herbs I learned about when I was um, a budding herbalist back in the dark ages. I was you would harvest lemon balm. It's in the mint family. It's extremely safe. It's got a lovely citrus flavor and scent,
Does. Yes, it
and
does.
um, and it can really lift your spirits. So it's not necessarily that it's enhancing the serotonin, but it is working in our minds and bodies in a way that is um, helpful and uplifting. So that's kind of a tonic. Other tonics would be nettle, very nutritious, and even roses. And I'll get to that in a minute. So the last category that I want to kind of put in your bonnet as you're listening to this list is vasodilators. So a vasodilator is an herb that can open the blood vessels, the capillary vein artery system of the body, and they dilate, they expand or open. And so that helps blood flow move. A lot of times we've got stenosis and cholesterol and things that are blocking vessels, or the vessels are stiff. It's a cardiovascular issue for the most part, but it can affect the mind and it can affect how you feel and how you think. And so vasodilators open up those vessels. Hawthorn is an example. Ginkgo is an example. And what they do is they get blood moving, and they also increase the amount of oxygen moving through your body and moving to your mind. So it can help with cognition and clarity of thought and memory. So that's another category of herbs to consider when you're looking at the whole big picture of anxiety.
I agree because, it's interesting that you mentioned memory because for me personally, when you start to think that you're forgetting something, your stress and anxiety go, whoop, they
Yeah.
can really go through the roof. So, it's interesting when you think about it. So you're like, what does that have to do with anxiety? But it does.
It really does. Yeah, it can be both a cause and an effect. So vasodilators are interesting. So if you have high blood pressure, you're likely taking pharmaceutical medications that serve as vasodilators. They're opening up your vessels. And so because of that, if you have low blood pressure, you kind of want to steer clear of the vasodilators because that can lower your blood pressure even more. So there are all sorts of contraindications to think about that are very important, but in general, these kind of herbs get blood moving, they get the oxygen flowing, they help both your digestion and your cognition and your emotional state. So all of those are different types of herbs to be aware of. So I wanted to share some examples of these. And just like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that anxiety shows up emotionally, physically, and cognitively, so in various ways in the body. Some herbs act that way as well. Uh, one of them is ashwagandha. It's called an adaptogen. And an adaptogen, we've got maybe a dozen or two of them. It's an herb that affects not only the body, but also the mind. Um, and ashwagandha, for instance, is slightly sedative. So it's a calming herb that can reduce that twitchy kind of anxiety when you're just a little bit panicky. And it can reduce stress and anxiety by lowering cortisol levels in the body. Ashwagandha, I like to take it as a powder. So if you can get to a health food store or you have a local herbalist who's growing it and they can dry it and powder it, then you can mix it in all sorts of things. You can put it in your oatmeal. You can put it in your juice. Different ways to get it in. You can also take it as capsules. I don't recommend tinctures very often unless it's for a very specific acute reasons, such as a panic attack. But if you've got ongoing anxiety, if it's genetic, if it's, you're just dealing with social stuff, if it's just that year for you, then you want to
Right.
take things that are, instead of tinctures, you want to be taking teas and powders and honeys. Um, those are much more gentle on your body and better for long term.
What is a tincture specifically?
A tincture is when an herb has been extracted into a menstruum, such as grain alcohol, like
Okay.
vodka. And you'll see them in the store. They're usually in little brown bottles with a little squeezy cap.
Mhm.
And you're meant to take them by the drop or the dropper full. So that's a tincture. It's very concentrated. It's usually grain alcohol, and they're strong.
I'm glad you mentioned the powder form because to me, for whatever reason, I always picture herbs as something you would take more in like a capsule, or that's how they usually appear generically in the store.
And
But
it's easy and it's convenient. And if you have a reputable source where you're getting your capsules, totally fine. But it's also, it's good, I think, to get to know your herbs in different forms. For instance, the powders, if you make oatmeal every morning, mix those powders in. You've got your cinnamon, mix in some ashwagandha, maybe some rose petal. You can teach your teenagers to do this. It's a nice way for them to develop that self agency, that feeling of I'm taking care of myself rather than just popping a pill. They're developing their own recipes and they're getting a sense of what the herbs taste like and how they act.
is it okay to use the powder? Would you use it in like baking or heat it up? Does it lose any type of potency when you do it that way?
I haven't seen any studies on that. I don't know for sure, but I would think it would. I
Okay.
think taking them raw, like in juice, what I like to do is get apple cider and put it in a little what are they, 4 ounce or 8 ounce glass mason jars with a lid. Scoop in my herb of choice, in this case ashwagandha, put the lid on and shake it and then drink it. And it still tastes like apple cider. It doesn't taste that much different. You can do the same with grapefruit juice or orange juice. But it's a way to get that herb in without it being in a pill form.
Okay. Well, and ashwagandha, I feel like I've heard about that a lot recently. Is there a reason that maybe that one is gaining a little popularity at this point in time?
In the past few years, the adaptogens in general have been more popular. People are learning more about them. They've become more accessible. Vendors that import herbs into the United States are making more relationships with the growers and harvesters in other countries, and so it's more accessible and readily available. And there's just more evidence. There's been a lot of studies about ashwagandha in particular that show its brain and mental health capacity.
Does that make you happy that we're talking about it more and that it's becoming more popular?
It makes me happy that people are understanding about herbs and how they work and doing it responsibly. That vendors and suppliers they're not getting their herbs from harvesters that just rip everything out of the ground and clear cut and over harvest and destroy plant populations. There's been a lot of understanding in the past decade about how terrible that is and how sustainable practices are so much better. And so that makes me happy that these herbs are available and they're available in the right way. And now we're understanding even more how to use them properly.
Well, I think I might have interrupted you with some of my questions, but
No,
okay,
that's fine.
you were going to mention some others.
Yeah, I've got a good list. You may have heard of Kava Kava. It's a South Pacific herb, and my experience with it is pretty limited, except for it's a ceremonial drink herb. And I've had it as a quick little ceremonial drink, which I honestly I don't think is very tasty. It was kind of disgusting, but it is considered an anxiolytic. It has an effect on the GABA receptors in the brain. It has what's called chivapyrones that are found in the root, and they bring about a feeling of calmness and relieving pain. So that could be useful for people who are experiencing anxiety that tenses your muscles. It helps you relax. It relieves that muscle pain and tension. In fact, it's so good at relieving muscle tension, it's being studied as an anti-seizure medication. The next on my list is lavender. Lavender, we're all familiar with. Literally, it means soap, or it comes from the word that means soap or to wash. Um, and it can be very calming. I find it to be just like peppermint, one of those herbs that can also be enlivening and kind of wake you up. So, depending on how it affects you, you may or may not want to use it to modulate the serotonin, those neurotransmitters that we talked about. It has not been named an SSRI, so that's a type of neurotransmitter support chemical, pretty much, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, but it has similar effects in the body. So it could be that keeping a little pillow of dried lavender on your bed so that you're sleeping and inhaling that fragrance, the scent from the essential oils, could be enough to help you sleep if you're experiencing anxiety that keeps you awake. Passionflower, next on our list. Passiflora, a lot of gardeners like to grow passionflower. It's a gorgeous, dazzling flower. It grows on a vine. It's interesting because it's a really strong brain and mental health herb, but it has pretty much no side effects. It's been listed as extremely safe, and it reduces anxiety. So it leads to feelings of relaxation. It can be calming, so it's used for insomnia. It can also be used for depression, which is different from anxiety. A lot of people think that those are the same, but anxiety is more of a fear and worry response. Depression is more of a sadness and loss response. They can happen, they can overlap, you can have both, but there are some herbs that work for one that don't necessarily work for another. I recommend using passionflower for major anxiety symptoms, strong symptoms, symptoms that don't react to other things. Passionflower may be the one to go to. In studies, it was shown not as effective with mild anxiety and more effective with stronger symptoms. Another garden herb that people may be familiar growing in their gardens is valerian. And valerian is known as kind of a stinky herb. The flowers, and especially the root, have a reputation for smelling like old socks. Not the loveliest bouquet scent. However, it is a natural sedative, it's a natural anti-inflammatory, and it can reduce anxiety. So it's a pretty strong tool in your toolkit. Not necessarily for a tea, but more for tinctures because of the flavor and the scent.
Yeah, it sounds like you might want to cover that up a little bit.
Yeah, it's not the best. It's not horrible, but it's not lovely either. Although it's a really cool plant. I don't know if you've ever grown it, but it can grow like 6 or 7 feet tall. And it has these beautiful sprays of flowers that are usually white, or they can be pink or purple. And it's got these serrated deep leaves. So it's a really striking garden feature plant. And it's either the flower or the root that you want to harvest.
A lot of these plants, based on where you live, in the world, what your growing season is like, is valerian something that even, I'm here in the Midwest, that you could get a little bit of use during the summertime?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you can get little sprigs of it from friends who grow it. It comes back pretty easily year after year. So just dig up the new growth in the spring, plant it, and by the end of the summer, you'll have a giant plant that you can harvest and make herbal medicine with it that year.
Interesting.
Yeah. Next on my list is chamomile. So most of us are very familiar with chamomile tea. Um, it's mildly bitter. If you were to drink it, you wouldn't necessarily say this is bitter, but it is just enough to be a carminative, which is a gentle support for your stomach. And of course, it's calming. That's why people drink chamomile tea is to relax. It's mildly sedative. It's aromatic. It smells lovely. People drink it for gas and bloating and digestive symptoms. So it's really prized as a bedtime tea. Helps you relax, helps you digest your dinner. And it's wonderful for anxiety. You can combine chamomile with other herbs such as skullcap, valerian that we just mentioned, passionflower, definitely. So a lot of these make good combinations. Rhodiola is another adaptogen grown in Russia, Siberia. Very strong anti-anxiety herb. However, because it's so strong, it can lead to irregular heartbeat if you're already taking anti-anxiety medication. And that's another thing to talk about is if you're already taking anti-anxiety medication or antidepressants, really do your research about the herbs that you take because you don't want to develop serotonin syndrome, which is where you get way too much of a good thing. And that is primarily seen with St. John's wort. St. John's wort got a lot of press. It became kind of a fad herb, maybe a decade or so ago, but for good reason because it has just knocked people's socks off with how effective it is as an antidepressant, and also useful for anxiety. So, St. John's wort is an herb that you can grow in your garden, but most people find it in the wild. It's easy to forage, and you want the little flowers, they're bright yellow flowers. That's why it's called St. John's wort because it tends to bloom on St. John's Day in the summer or summer solstice. And I find that it's really lovely, not just as a long-term aid for chronic depression, but as a short-term aid for anxiety and especially panic attacks. If you or the person you are caring for is suffering, say a teenager goes to school and as soon as they get off the school bus, they start having heavy breathing and their heart starts racing and their eyes dilate and they can't focus because they're so nervous about walking into school for their school day. That kind of panic attack really responds well to St. John's wort, as well as the long-term chronic need. And that's where a tincture comes in handy. So I was saying earlier, for short-term acute issues, that's where a tincture is great because you can carry that in your purse or your bag, whip it out, drop some drops on your tongue. A typical dose is about a quarter teaspoon or a dropper full from a tincture bottle. And that's all you need. You don't need to brew tea. You don't need to bring a thermos. You don't need to have your powders. You don't need to take pills and have people wondering why you're taking pills. Um, just that quick little spot on your tongue can be enough to alleviate a panic attack.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know because I was kind of wondering when you would want to take these different varieties of herbs. And okay, so a tincture can have a quicker, more immediate
Exactly.
result. Okay.
Short term, acute, you need it right now. That's when a tincture is really helpful. Or for, say, 2 weeks. You take it every day for 2 weeks, but it's just that short period of time. Say someone you love died and you went to their funeral, and for 2 weeks, you're having a really rough time. A tincture can be very helpful. But if you're dealing with something that is chronic in, say, 6 months or longer, you're going to want not so much a tincture because of the grain alcohol content. It can be harsh on your liver, that kind of thing.
Okay. That makes sense.
So lemon balm, we talked about that. A lot of people use lemon balm to help them focus when they're taking tests, when they're studying for something. No matter your age, whether you're a teenager or a 70-year-old, lemon balm has been shown to help increase focus, mental clarity, cognition. It's also just a lovely, calming herb that stabilizes your emotions, your reactions, your responses. A lot of people with ADD and ADHD find that lemon balm helps crystallize what they're doing and how they're focusing throughout the day. So it's a lovely mind and mental herb, though, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't have that direct neurotransmitter effect. It's working in other ways. one of those good holistic herbs that's really just for your mind and your body as a whole. And you can take lemon balm in many different ways. As a tea, it's delicious. You can combine it with lemon verbena, nettle, spearmint. You can combine lemon with whatever you want, lemon balm. You can take it as a tincture. You can make a vinegar with it, which I think is really fun. So it's just a matter of chopping up your fresh or dried lemon balm leaves, putting them in a jar, pouring your apple cider or apple peel vinegar over them, letting them sit for roughly 2 weeks, straining out the leaves, and then you've got this medicine. It's a remedy, it's a home remedy, which is vinegar based with your herbal medicine extracted into it. And you can use that vinegar on your salads, on your vegetables, anywhere you would use lemon juice. You can take it by the teaspoonful. You can mix honey in it and create what's called an oxymel, which is just a sweet tart remedy that you can take by the spoonful, which is really fun. It's a fun way to introduce people to herbal medicine. It's tasty. And, if you take a little spoonful of vinegar and honey, you're probably not getting as much as you get in a teacup of hot herbal tea made from those same leaves. So it's a different dosage, but it's still getting it into your body, and over time that builds up and you can see the effects.
Yeah, and a nice way to maybe gently introduce yourself to using it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's creative and it gives you a chance to be in your garden. Lemon balm is really easy to grow. You can grow it in a pot on your deck or on your windowsill. You don't have to have a whole garden, and it does spread. It's a mint, so it's going to take over. But it's lovely. You can just chew on the leaves. It's a really straightforward way. If you're having a panic attack or you're just feeling in the moment, the stress and the overwhelm, chewing on a fresh leaf in the summer is wonderful.
Yes, and I think part of that too is you're using a couple of your senses because I have grown it before and it
Hmm.
does just smell beautiful, and I think it's between the smell and the feeling kind of that healing quality of it and growing it. When you combine all of those things, it makes for a really nice experience.
It really does. And if you're sharing that or teaching someone else about that, it's really nice to give people that experience because it opens their eyes to Mother Nature and to their own connection. And it's a nice way to get away from the bottles of pills that we see on store shelves, and to understand their effects in the body and on the mind. So that's one of the reasons I love herbalism.
Yes, I agree. Um, did we get all the herbs?
I have two more if we
Okay,
have
yes.
time. Okay. One is Motherwort. It's also in the mint family. It spreads like wildfire. It's incredibly bitter. So you taste the leaf, and instead of the citrus flavor like lemon balm, you've just got bitter exploding in your mouth, which it can be a lot, but I think it's also really helpful because for digestion in particular, it's really good for indigestion, heartburn, gas, bloating. Motherwort is called motherwort because it's the plant for mothers. So people who are stressed, people who are caring for others, people who are frazzled, and it's a great herb for panic attacks. It's traditionally used this way. I haven't come across any studies that confirm it, or anybody who has even studied it at all that I'm aware of. But traditionally, it's used. I've used it myself. I see the effects really quickly. It's another one for the tincture bottle, a
Okay.
few drops during a panic attack. And then the last one that I want to share is roses. And roses have been traditionally used for grief and sadness and anxiety for centuries. It's a long-term traditional herb used all over the world, just the rose petal from the flower. And you want to use herbs or roses that haven't been sprayed with any sort of pesticide. You want to make sure they're clean and safe. But roses are especially lovely as a gentle tonic to ease those feelings of anxiety, feeling nervous, and especially grief. And often those go hand in hand. You're experiencing those emotions sometimes at the same time. And so roses can be really lovely as a tea. It can be mixed with other herbs, or you can just drink rose tea. You can make rose tea and do other fun things with it, like you can make rose petal rice pudding, which is just a sumptuous, delectable treat. You know, if you feel like you need to treat yourself because you've been anxious or sad, make yourself a bowl of hot rose petal rice pudding. It's creamy, it's healing, it's lovely. And you can also make a tea and then pour the tea into an ice cube tray so that you've got rose ice cubes made from that tea. And then you can suck on them. You can add them to your other teas that you drink. Put them into your bath when you're filling it up with hot water to soak in. So many different creative ways to use these herbs, but those are among the top herbs in my list for supporting yourself and others with anxiety.
And it sounds easily accessible.
Right, right. Easy to come across. For the most part, the herbs on this list are widely available. Some might be trickier to get than others. Some are just weeds, literally, but they're so useful and can be widely beneficial when you're dealing with anxiety and stress.
That was a very good list. But I'm not rhyming, but how can we take that list and start to incorporate that in our daily lives that will feel a little more natural for us?
Yeah. I think most people are familiar with teas, brewing tea, and that's one of the easiest and safest ways to use herbs. And so that's what I usually recommend is you pick one or two from that list, maybe three if you're drawn to them, and you get to know those herbs really well. Forget about the others for now. Just pick those two or three and make your teas. See what they taste like. Brew it for 3 minutes, brew it for 10 minutes. What's the difference? How do you feel after you drink it? Is it something you want to drink in the morning? Is it something you want to drink at night? Just get to know those herbs. And you'll really begin to understand how they affect the symptoms that you're experiencing, how they affect your digestion, your heart, your overall attitude, and then build upon that. Can you use those particular herbs in other ways? Can you add other herbs to these and make blends? I think that's a very easy, straightforward way to go for someone who is just beginning.
Yeah, I think tea is probably a very easy way to start because most of us drink tea and it's an easy way to play around with it. I like that. Just focusing on two or three in the beginning to really get to know yourself and how you respond.
And it's inexpensive. You can get a tiny little bag of dried herbs at a health food store or your local herbalist for pretty cheap. And you can make, from a little 4-ounce bag of herbs, for instance, you could probably brew 20 cups of tea and experiment, and you're not wasting money. You're not throwing out expensive, ingredients. You don't have to purchase special equipment. If you've got a pot that you can heat water in, you're good. And then start building on your repertoire. Start with honeys. What kind of honey do you like? Can you add your herbs to the honey? Get powders, milks, and vinegars. These are fun things to extract your herbs into and just play around with. But definitely consider the brain mental health capacity of the herbs, and also consider the contraindications because there can be herbs that should not be taken if you're on pharmaceutical meds. So just be aware that this isn't just, it can be fun in the kitchen, but it's also a seriously valid and useful way to address brain and mental health. It's not just kitchen play. It can be fun and it can be very enjoyable to play around with the kitchen aspects of it. But these can be very serious medicines and they can have a tremendous effect on your brain and mental health positively, but also negatively if you have those contraindications. So it's definitely something to take seriously.
But the whole side effect thing, it works both ways. It works with pharmaceuticals also and other things that you're doing. There are side effects. So you're right. Just take that into consideration because if you've had those issues in the past, it could be something that comes up for you.
Yeah, and if you're just using herbs, if you're not on any other medications, then there's not very much to worry about. It's just when you combine them, you want to work with your healthcare team. You want to be very vocal about what you're taking. And if you do want to just be on herbs, talk with your doctor about weaning off pharmaceuticals onto, for instance, St. John's wort. A lot of people do that, and you can do it if you do it safely.
Yes, you have to be a voice for yourself and the way that you'd like to incorporate a more healthy lifestyle, a more natural lifestyle. I think sometimes people are afraid to speak up for themselves and say, I'd like to try something different. We're so intimidated by traditional medicine that
Mhm.
I think you explaining these things and you encouraging people to try different things because you don't know what's going to work for you.
Exactly. And then the vasodilators we didn't even touch on. I mean, you've got ginkgo, garlic, cayenne pepper, ginger. All of these things are things that are probably in most people's kitchens already. And they can really make a big difference in how your brain operates and the cognition and the function and helping your brain strengthen itself to move away from anxiety.
Okay, so now we know where anxiety comes from, and I'm picturing that little wave in my head. And we know a great list of different herbs that we can use. And we know that we could put them in teas, and there's tinctures, and even incorporating them into things that we already cook with. Like you said, vinegar and honey. Where can we learn more about you and maybe more about your work and your courses or any other types of resources that you would suggest?
Thank you. Yeah, so my courses, Herbs for the Brain Beginner and Herbs for the Brain Certificate. They're both available on my website. And the certificate course, if your listeners, if you're an acupuncturist or a nurse or a counselor, my course has been approved for 13 CEUs for these professionals. So it's a very solid foundational program. And if you're a beginner, the beginner course is full of the kitchen information and the basics on how to support yourself and your family. That's at my website, school.hollybellebuono.com. And I've got other courses on digestion and herbs for mama and baby, and a wide variety of beginner and intermediate courses to help you learn about herbal medicine and natural health. And then I'm also hosting a retreat in Italy in May. We're going to be going to Tuscany and for 11 nights and 12 days exploring Florence and Siena, botanical gardens, herbal sanctuaries, doing wine tastings. So I would invite your folks to come, to sign up, to participate with me. It's going to be wonderful. And that will be beginning May 24th.
Well, again, thank you, Holly, for coming back and taking the time with us. And I think that everyone will get so much out of watching and experimenting with different things. So thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you again, and for all of you who are watching, if you want to keep this conversation going, please come visit us at joinempart.com. Our community is all about supporting each other through this journey, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real insights, and share it with anyone who might need a little extra calm in their lives. Remember, menopause is a journey, but you're not alone.